Welcome to the Knowledge Problem Podcast. The objective of this podcast is to engage policy professionals over thought-provoking and sometimes sensitive topics. We aim to bring these professionals together in a way that does not feed into the tribalist narratives plaguing society today. It is my hope, and the hope of all involved in this endeavor, that by allowing these ideas to contend and challenge each other with mutual respect, everyone who listens will learn something not previously considered.
The opinions and views of all guests do not necessarily reflect the views of the Knowledge Problem or of anyone involved in its production.
Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Knowledge Problem Podcast. I'm your host, Regan Ferrell, and on today's episode we are discussing the topic of abortion. Approaching the topic from the pro-life perspective, we have Emily Berning. Together with her husband, Emily helped found, and she now serves as president of the organization, Let Them Live. Let Them Live offers pregnant women the financial support they need in order to choose keeping a baby over getting an abortion. Since its incorporation in 2019, Let Them Live has helped nearly 100 women through pregnancy. Approaching the topic from the pro-choice perspective, we have Avens O'Brien. Avens is a longtime Libertarian activist, and she serves as a board member for the Feminists for Liberty. She chairs the Libertarian Party's pro-choice caucus and is based out of Los Angeles. An abortion rights speaker, she wants to protect women from the shame and stigma that comes from society after an abortion. For the first question, what is an abortion, and why do women have them? Emily, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, first of all, for allowing us to have this discussion. I think it's really important to figure out kind of like where we can find common ground and, help women that are in need. So that kind of leads into, who has abortions. I mean, the whole purpose of Let Them Live is to support women that are financially struggling and in crisis, because 73% of women have abortions because of financial reasons. And that's a really, really big number. And through my experience offering financial support to these women facing this abortion decision, is a real practical way to help them, make a different decision that they wouldn't normally make. So, like I said, 73% of women having abortions is a really big one. I don't know other percentages as much. I know that there's educational reasons, other things like that. I'm sure Avens can touch on that as well. But that is definitely one of the most prevalent reasons that we see.
Absolutely. So one thing that I love about having discussions with Emily on this topic is that we often get our statistics from the same place. So we are usually having this conversation where we're not arguing about the facts. We're just arguing about our conclusions from the facts. Yes, that number is correct. That 73% of women who are having abortions because or feel that there's a financial reason for having an abortion. Some other stats about women who have abortions, I believe it's over half of women who have had abortions already have had a child, which really kind of can tell us a bit about whether people are feeling like they're overwhelmed with already having had kids, things like that. And I believe over half of women who have abortions also report having used birth control during the time that they got pregnant, but that also indicates that perhaps that birth control is failing, and that might be a really good place to educate, to teach people, maybe you're not taking your birth control pill at the same time every day, or maybe it's conflicting with other medications or things like that. So when it comes to abortions and let's say preventing abortions, I'm of the opinion that I'd like to prevent unwanted pregnancy. I don't have the opinion about abortion itself. I'd like to prevent abortions by preventing unwanted pregnancy. And so I see these really interesting spaces where if more than half of the women who have abortions are utilizing birth control, but possibly not utilizing it effectively, then it's important to make sure that women know how to use their birth control, and that they're able to then prevent that unwanted pregnancy in the first place. There's a number of other stats on that, but I think those are some of the most ones that I end up talking about the most often with people in abortion discussions.
Yeah, we just had, I mean, I can't tell you how many situations I've seen where they say my birth control failed, and I was not expecting this. And that is definitely very common. I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is definitely something that we see. And I think education in general of, okay, there is a chance that when you have sex, you could get pregnant. This is how it happens. Like I'm more for like education of more like of a natural type. So, like natural family planning type thing, like knowing your body, knowing when you ovulate, those types of things. I think it's important too, because it allows women to sort of connect with their body as well and just kind of know what's going on. I mean, sometimes we don't even know what's going on with our body, and like our hormone levels are up and down and like what's going on. So it's always good to know about that as well. And then say, okay, you know what, like, especially when women are married or in relationships, hey, I'm ovulating right now. Let's block out this time for not having sex. So that's another way as well. But I agree that education is very, very important, because if that pregnancy doesn't happen in the first place, then that's good. If that's not what the outcome is or that they wanted. So
right.
While we're on the topic of education, how much emphasis should be placed on the knowledge of the mother or the father before they're able to have an abortion? If, for example, they don't understand that sex leads to pregnancy, should that change how available the abortion is? Avens, let's start with you.
Well, I would say, I mean, when it comes to my perspective on this, I think that any reason to have an abortion is a valid reason to have an abortion. So whether or not someone understands that sex leads to pregnancy, or whether they, use birth control or anything else, like that doesn't change my position that any reason somebody chooses to have an abortion to me is a legitimate reason to choose to have an abortion, because I strongly believe that like anyone should be able to do what they need to with their own body, what they feel that is right with their own body. So yeah, I guess my perspective on that is simply that if someone doesn't understand that sex leads to pregnancy, I don't necessarily think that the best course of action is going to be for that person to then carry a child and like to carry a pregnancy to term and have a baby. There are people who opt to do that. There are all sorts of situations, and people make the choices that they make. But to me, I don't see like people who, when it comes down to it, like people who either don't know enough about sex or we're being, let's say, reckless and not using birth control or not understanding what these things will lead to. I don't necessarily think that the world is bettered by those people having children. Potentially, if those people want to have the child and then give it up for adoption, that could be fine. I just don't necessarily think that that's the best course of action. But I think that people should make the best course of action decisions for themselves with the people around them. So, not my place to say.
Well, oddly enough, obviously I don't fully agree with you, but in a weird way, I agree with you in the sense that I do believe that women have legitimate reasons for considering or like scheduling abortions. Like I do believe that they have legitimate concerns and worries. And that's actually something that Let Them Live kind of separates ourselves from the pro-life movement on, because I actually just came across a Facebook group the other day, and it's called Cool Motives Still Murder. And I was like, all right, what is this? And basically they're in there calling women whores and sluts and, oh, well, you should have kept your legs closed, and it doesn't matter the reason that you're having an abortion because you shouldn't be doing it. But I'm of the mindset that when someone says, hey, I'm having an abortion, I want to say, okay, what's kind of like leading you to that? Because I want to help you address those concerns. So like, I know that there are legitimate concerns that women have, especially like financial, for example. So in a like a weird kind of way, like I do agree with you in a sense that there are obviously like legitimate things. And on the same topic, whether or not a woman or a man engaging in sex know about birth control or have any knowledge of it, I mean, shit happens. Don't know if I'm supposed to say shit, but it does. And sometimes people don't know how to navigate the aftermath, but I certainly don't think that that means that they must get an abortion. I think sometimes we've worked with women and girls that, just maybe don't quite understand. They don't really understand sex. They don't really quite understand. They don't really just get it that when you have sex, there's a chance of pregnancy. And I think that it's our duty to help them even more after the fact, because they're in a situation that they didn't actually think, like they didn't legitimately think that they would be in. And so in those situations, I've noticed with our work at Let Them Live that we have had to step up even more for those women and help them even more and help them to see and help them educate going forward that yes, just so you know, like having sex can lead to pregnancy, and let's kind of like think about these options, and let's think about your next steps. And then this is also totally random. I just looked at my notes too. This is kind of a sidetrack, but this is something that I've learned. I used to be the pro-lifer that would say, oh, well, you don't want to have your baby, just give it up for adoption. And I've learned a whole lot through Let Them Live. And what I've learned is that women facing crisis pregnancies, probably like 9 times out of 10, I would say, would rather have an abortion than give their child up for adoption, because in the moment, having the abortion, they don't need to carry the child, they don't need to give birth, they don't need to like see their baby. It's a lot less like emotional attachment. Right. And so they would rather go through that abortion rather than like go through the entire process and then give their baby up. And this is something that the pro-life movement keeps like pushing on women. Well, if you don't want it, just adopt. And these moms feel so like incapable. And they feel like, man, I must be like a really bad mom, for doing this. And so I've learned, and we fight pro-life people all the time on this issue and just say, hey, like, let's adopt both of them. Like, let's adopt the mom and her baby, and let's make sure they know that they're both loved and not just focus on the fetus, And that's something that I know that was kind of a sidetrack, but that's a huge thing that bothers me. And this is why I think this is more of a discussion, because lately I've been just like more in agreement with a lot of pro-choice people lately than I have pro-life people. And that makes me really sad that the pro-life people aren't seeing this. But that is something I brought up. And so not that we don't support adoption, but we've only had one mom out of all the moms that we've helped. And so anything that we can do to make sure that they know that they're loved and supported, we sure will. But at the end of the day, if she's not taking our help, like, what can we do? So
I very much appreciate that perspective as well. Like you mentioned, that forum where they're talking about women, and saying they're, sluts or whores or anything like that, is a lot of times when I'm talking to pro-lifers who are, of a very conservative ilk, particularly, or I don't even want to say conservative, because there are conservatives who are actually fine, but it's this like really misogynistic ilk that are just very negative towards single mothers, particularly. Yeah. And that all fascinates me, because it's like, if you want like less women to choose abortion, then you need to destigmatize single motherhood.
Yes, 100%.
And then they'll complain that like single motherhood is destigmatized in certain communities, but it's certainly not like in a lot of populations. And so, so we deal with this issue of like, if a woman gets pregnant and she, is considering single motherhood as an option, or she's considering an abortion, like, and you're adamantly opposed to having an abortion, then why would you try to make single motherhood a bad choice too? Like,
you hit the nail on the head with that one. And like you just said it perfectly. I mean, if we're going to be trying to support this woman and help her, choose life over abortion, then we actually have to do that. And we're not going to do that, guaranteed, by calling her names and saying just really terrible things. I had somebody email me just the other day, a donor, he had donated one time, and he was just going off. And I was like, I emailed him back and I told him I'm very protective of our moms. And if he's ever going to call, our moms' names, like, I do not want his donations. I do not want him to be part of this Let Them Live family, because we have no room for that. We have no room for shame or judgment or anything, because we need to step up for these women and single moms. Like, they're amazing, and they can take on the world. So I completely agree with you. Like, that makes me feel so good that somebody finally is saying that, because I see so many pro-life people that just absolutely don't care about the woman.
Right. Yay agreement.
It sounds a lot like pro-choice and pro-life advocates are speaking past both ideological opposites and themselves. Emily, could you expand on that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that there is just, there's a lot going on in the world, and everybody wants to fight about something, and nobody wants to find agreement. But there is so much common ground to be found between pro-life people and pro-choice people. And I found that there's a lot of disagreement that pro-life people have between themselves. And look, through the work with Let Them Live, I have, like I said before, I have learned so much. I used to be that pro-lifer that, didn't really look at the mom, didn't really care, just wanted to make sure that the baby was safe, that type of thing. And I don't think that that's very productive, because at the end of the day, who is walking into that abortion clinic? It's the woman. At the end of the day, who is making that decision? It's the woman. And so the pro-life community isn't so fixated on the fetus that they forget who's carrying that human being. And so pro-choicers and pro-lifers, I mean, Let Them Live has had pro-choice donors and pro-choice supporters, something I've never thought would ever be possible, because we are a pro-life organization. But it turns out that there are people on both sides that do want to help women make a choice for life. It's true. It actually exists, and then there's pro-life people that hate what Let Them Live does. And so it's just been an interesting dynamic to fight with people who allegedly believe what I believe, and then to agree with people that disagree with me. And so it's an interesting thing, and it shows us that moving forward, we can bridge the gap between pro-life, pro-choice, and we can work together to help women, just to help women, I guess, would be the best thing. We can help women.
I definitely, I agree with that too, is that it's even in the nomenclature, because it's like pro-life versus pro-choice. Like, I know so many people who are personally pro-life who don't want to take away someone's choice. They just like them to make a different choice, right? Like, I know plenty of pro-lifers who are personally pro-life who don't necessarily want government regulations, because they don't think that they're going to be effective, and they want people to make this decision out of love and out of like support for life. And on the same token, I know a lot of, in the pro-choice movement, it's a very broad spectrum. A lot of pro-lifers will act like all pro-choicers are pro-abortion, right? And a lot of pro-choicers will say, look, I'm not really big into abortion, or I don't like abortions, after a certain number of weeks, or like, there are lots of different perspectives in the pro-choice movement about the necessity of abortion, about why people have abortions and what's acceptable. And so those discussions happen even within the pro-choice movement, of people saying, well, I'm fine with the first and second trimester, but not with the third. Like, this happens all the time when you get into like the legalese discussions. But that's what I appreciate, is that like the pro-choice movement is about the choice, right? And in many cases, like, things get kind of bastardized in like the public forums and the public settings, where somebody who's pro-choice is diminishes the severity of that choice. And that means like for a lot of women opting to have abortions, it's often a hard decision, and it's a decision that they're considering lots of factors. They're considering whether their partner's involved, whether their family is supportive, whether they think they have the financial means, and or whether or not they're just willing to like give their body to this thing, this experience for 9-10 months and then on, and so I think that sometimes in public dialogue, it just gets so heated, because nobody wants to give any ground. And when it comes to like, I'm a libertarian, so on a legal front, I don't want to give any ground. But it's important to recognize that most people see at least some kind of like moral gray area regarding abortion. And and so we have these places of connection. We have these places where we can say, I respect that some women really don't want to have abortions. And I certainly don't want to convince people who don't want to have abortions to have abortions. I think that would be a terrible idea, right? And then on the pro-life side of things, I see a lot of people, kind of ignoring the mother, ignoring the factors that caused this pregnancy in the first place, that caused, someone to consider having an abortion in the first place. And so I think a lot of times these groups are talking past each other. And I'm an active person in the Libertarian Party, and we have a group called Pro-Choice Libertarians. And some of us have been working on this kind of coalition of reproductive liberty. And this reproductive liberty coalition is based on the idea that we want to get government out of the way so that people can do whatever they feel they need to in terms of accessing birth control, or getting to know their bodies and their cycles, or educating people about pregnancy prevention, or about the consequences of sex or anything like that. And that includes taking away the barriers for adoption, taking away the barriers for people to be able to donate towards, to make sure that people are able to support whatever choices they want to support, whether it's funding an organization like Let Them Live, which I think that's great that you want to focus on the mothers and the child, right? And for me, I mean, ironically, we get along great, but it's really funny because my if I were to start a nonprofit organization, I already do this without having a nonprofit, but I'm often somebody, because I'm a public figure that talks about abortion rights. I've had multiple women come up to me online or whatever and say, hey, I just found out I'm pregnant and I need to have an abortion, and I'm freaking out because, Planned Parenthood told me it was going to be this much money and I don't have that much money. And what should I do? And what people often don't understand is that every week that you are waiting to get a paycheck in order to pay for that abortion, one, it takes a toll on your body, and two, it takes a toll on your bank account, because it ends up costing more the longer you wait. And so ironically, if I were to do a nonprofit organization, it would be funding abortions as early as possible for women who want them. And so it's the polar opposite of you, but at the same time, it's I want to give people as much resources to make those choices as possible. If someone came to me and said, I really want to have this baby, but I can't afford to, so I think maybe I should just have an abortion because $600 or $800 is easier than having to carry a child and prenatal care and postnatal care and all that stuff. And if that person is deeply doesn't want to have an abortion, I'd send them your way, Emily. I'd say, hey, there's an organization that could potentially help you. And I know you wouldn't send if somebody came to you and was I desperately want an abortion, you're not going to send them my way. But the fact is I want more options like that to exist, so that any woman, freaking out about, oh my God, I have an unplanned pregnancy, can decide what choice she wants to make, and that choice can be made, as painlessly as possible, to be quite frank.
Well, and it's crazy too. So, I'm always shocked that an organization like Let Them Live hasn't existed in the past, because this thing of having abortions because of financial reasons has existed for a long time. And I'm how can we have not come up with this? How is it 2020 and this is the first time that this is happening? And it's because the pro-life movement, this is not a blanket statement. This is just kind of a general thing. I think that the pro-life movement has failed women, not completely. I don't know how to say this. I don't think the pro-life movement has completely failed women, but I think that there were opportunities to help more, but it made people too uncomfortable to do it. And Nathan and I are very much people that step out of our comfort zone and do things that normal people wouldn't do. Our first mom that we ever helped, we emptied our bank account. We only had $1,200 to our name, and we helped her. We paid her bills. We took care of her. Normal people don't do that. They don't want to step out of their comfort zone, and people get weird with money. But the thing I tell donors all the time is that there are organizations that fund abortions. So You've got the National Abortion Federation, and they connect women with abortion funds in their state. We just had a situation where a girl, she had her abortion paid for. She had the travel paid for. I mean, she was pretty upset about it, and she ended up not going through it. She found us on Instagram, like literally right before the abortion, and she had talked to her counselor like in the bathroom at Planned Parenthood. But she had that all paid for, and so I tell our donors that, and then I say, well, if there's funding for abortion, then why can we not fund life? Why can we not be there for women that need us? And so many people, this is kind of touching on what I said before, but so many pro-life people are just automatically skeptical, and they're like, no way, we just send her diapers. I'm like, you guys, diapers are not going to pay the rent. These are real situations. And if you really want to save lives from abortion, like you're claiming to do, just like I claim, then we have to put our money where our mouth is. It's time for that. If there's money out there to pay for abortions, then there's got to be money out there to help people not have abortions.
Not only do I totally agree with that, and I appreciate that. One of the things that I often say is like, if you take a look at the amount of money that lobbyists and other organizations on both the pro-life and the pro-choice side spend on lobbying the government to keep abortion illegal, lobbying like to get bills passed in state legislatures so that governors will sign them, so that the SCOTUS will take it up. It's like this kind of like constant battle, right? And everyone's lobbying, everyone's throwing donations at their politicians, hoping that they'll either make abortion illegal or fight to keep abortion legal. And I look at all that money that has to be spent to fight off the government or use the government to fight, right? And it's so sad because it's billions of dollars. And like all of that money, if Planned Parenthood could spend all of that lobbying money, if it didn't have to worry about abortion like possibly being illegal, or if what's the other NARAL or any of those other organizations, if they didn't have to like be fighting on that front, then all of that money could be spent on, helping women procure abortions. And on the pro-life side, all the organizations that are, drafting up legislation with heartbeat bills in states and whatever, and all these organizations that are sending money to Republican legislators hoping that they're going to support their bills, if they got to spend all of their money instead of like trying to force people to make this decision, but rather like on organizations like yourself that say, hey, like if you don't want to have an abortion, like here's another option, like let's help you. And if these organizations were able to spend that money not on fighting over the weapon, which is the apparatus of the state, and were able to instead spend that money on what they care about, on what they really want to have happen, whether it's having abortions or choosing life, like that would just be so much better, right? It would be so much better on so many fronts, including the idea that there wouldn't be this like gigantic conversation around every presidential election or every senatorial thing about, and every SCOTUS justice about throwing money towards candidates because you think that they're going to be either pro-choice or pro-life. Mm-hmm. And it's like all that money could be spent on the results that you want. And the thing is, it's voluntary. So they can be the results that you want or the results that I want. But they'd be voluntary, and they'd be, and it would be like so much better than it being spent on this like huge government apparatus.
Yeah, I mean, we give way too much power to government. We give way too much power to legislators, and so I agree with you in that sense that, I would love all that money because I know the impact that we could have. Like, I know for a fact the impact we would have. I know the impact we currently have on our moms, and I would love $1 billion. That'd be amazing. I do think some laws regarding abortion are good, and to kind of touch on that, these are just the laws that basically hold abortion clinics to the same standard as other healthcare outpatient places. So for example, it is my opinion that if a place like Planned Parenthood, for example, is going to claim that they are a healthcare facility, that they'd be held to the same standards as other healthcare facilities and not necessarily be given special treatment. But if they don't want to be held to the same standard as healthcare facilities, then they they shouldn't necessarily call themselves a healthcare facility. But I do think for just basic safety of all people, there are certain standards that need to be met, and that is something that has been debated for such a long time. And the other thing too that's a big one is informed consent on the mother's part. So woman is going into Planned Parenthood, she needs to know fully what's going on, because I think sometimes just in our culture in general, there's not necessarily a lot of, at least from the women I know, I know that there's not a lot of knowledge of, okay, what's actually going to happen, or what am I going to feel after this? It's just kind of like, hey, come on in, let's do it. I mean, just from the stories that I've heard. So I do think it's important to have, just standard healthcare laws that are protecting these women, and informed consent. I do think that that's pretty basic, but otherwise, I mean, that there are other laws that I just think are kind of pointless. And I do think that a lot of people fight this battle that it feels like they're just kind of fighting this battle off in the distance, and they're not actually thinking, okay, what is this woman thinking? What is she going through? Let me put myself in her shoes and imagine I'm in this situation and my bank account is negative and my rent is $2,000 a month because I live in New York and I can't put food on the table. She needs immediate help. She needs somebody to advocate for her. And sometimes laws, I mean, you and I both know you can make things illegal, but that doesn't necessarily change the culture. Politics is downstream from culture. And so if we're ever going to affect change, I think it needs to happen at the cultural level. So for example, if we made abortion illegal, guaranteed there's still women that think they want to do it, and nothing can change their mind. But if we meet people one-on-one and say how can I help you? And we can help kind of shift their position or help shift their view on it. It could be legal or illegal. You could have somebody like me, for example, and it wouldn't matter if abortion was legal or illegal. I would think it's wrong. And so I think that this is a cultural battle more than it is, all that to say, this is a cultural battle, I think, more than it is a legal one. So for the most part, I do agree with you that there's a lot going on with legislators. And honestly, they don't care. They don't care. Nathan and I were just talking about this the other day. You elect somebody who says they're pro-life and they're Republican, or you select someone who's pro-choice and they're Democrat or whatever they are. And 9 times out of 10, they're not going to do anything that they say they're going to do. Nothing's going to get done because everybody's blocking everybody. And then what are we left with? A lot of money gone that could have helped people that didn't help people. And so I agree. I would love that money. I would love for people to donate to on the ground, action-oriented nonprofits that are really meeting women one-on-one.
I think it's interesting too from the just backing up to the law part of things is so I'm a libertarian. I'm opposed to all, as many laws as possible, right? But when you bring up something like uniformity of law, if there are going to be certain standards for medical providers, then they should be universal, right? That's a good one. That it's still interesting because certain pro-life groups have really moved to actually try to make abortion clinics more straight up punitively legislated against. And one of the great examples of this is HB2, which was in Texas, that SCOTUS actually, the Supreme Court actually struck down the regulation because it caused 90% of abortion clinics to shut down. And the reason for it was because it created higher standards. Abortion clinics had to meet higher standards than doctors' offices, than any other like facility. So you could go to a doctor and you could get a dilation and aspiration because you were having a miscarriage. But if you went to a doctor in an abortion clinic to get a dilation and aspiration for an abortion, you had completely different like requirements of that doctor who's doing it electively versus a doctor who's cleaning up after a miscarriage, even though that procedurally they're exactly the same procedure. And so it's interesting because like I would love it if the pro-life movement would at least like keep its legislative hands to things like uniformity of care rather than what they did in that particular circumstance, which was specifically targeting abortion clinics, not because abortion clinics weren't meeting the same standards, but because they decided that if they had to meet harder standards, then they would actually shut some of them down.
And then you ultimately, from like a legislative standpoint, a lot of money was poured into that. It went to Supreme Court. You said, was it the Texas Supreme Court or the United States Supreme Court?
The U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court.
So it went there and it was shut down. All right. Okay. So like, all right. Well, what's what I mean? It's like it was shut down. Like, I know we could have, with that money, I know we could have saved the lives that they were trying to save. Like, I think this is coming from from a pro-life perspective. I do think it's coming from like a place of they are trying to fight and save lives, but I don't know if it's effective is essentially what I'm getting at. So yeah.
So we've been talking about SCOTUS, and there have been quite a few conservative appointments over the past few years. Do you think SCOTUS will hear a case to overturn Roe if it has enough momentum, or will they follow precedent? Why don't we start with Avens this time?
I really, it's something that I wonder because the balance of the court has always been, it's always the topic in like presidential elections and everything. It's just this constant like, oh my God, are they going to overturn Roe? Are they going to overturn Roe? We've seen, 3 new Trump appointments and, everybody has, if you subscribe to the pro-choice newsletters, they're all like, all of these people are going to destroy abortion rights as we know it. Like that's what they all say. And, I honestly, I'm not sure how to say it this way. I'm not sure how activist those judges are going to be on the bench. I honestly don't know. And, do I fear a situation in which the federal government is preventing abortion because as it stands, there are I think, oh God, I usually have these numbers readily available and I just have too many other numbers in my head right now. So I just literally my brain does not have it. But I had the numbers of 22 states would have immediate laws that if Roe v. Wade was overturned would then go in and prevent abortion more than Roe v. Wade allows them to. But again, it's I wish I usually have those numbers in front of me, and unfortunately I have other numbers in front of me and I can't recall those right now. So I am concerned about a situation in which Roe v. Wade is overturned and some states immediately attempt to prohibit abortion, and some states will be, let's say, safe havens for women seeking abortions. But I'm not 100% sure. I don't think it's set in stone that because Trump got these 3 people in that they're going to actually do anything about it. Because if you look at their legislative record, their judicial records, they all tend to have a respect for precedents. They all they tend to there are things about this that indicate that they may not be activist judges, even though they seem every side wants to make the other side's judges seem like activist judges, right? Oh, they're going to do something totally crazy and they're going to change everything. So I don't yeah, neither Emily or I are I guess law students, or I don't think we necessarily have or have this knowledge directly or as well as to be able to speak informed on that topic. But I would say that my indications are that I think this will just continue to be a thing that the left and the right scares us all with. And I think it's honestly probably more valuable to both sides as a thing to scare people about than it is actually to do something about. And that's what worries me, is that with both sides of the aisle, I often see that it feels like that stalemate of being angry about what the other side might do seems to be more valuable than actually doing the thing, whichever the thing is, whether it's making abortion like completely legal, like 100%, like, never a problem again, or, making abortion illegal and making it so that women can't have abortions. I feel like they all benefit from it being in this middle ground. And so I'm not sure that anyone wants to push the button. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not sure.
No, I agree. I think that this us versus them mentality, just to hit on that, is really detrimental to women who need our help. And I do agree with you. I think everybody, especially this year, it's just been so ridiculous with, well, if this person wins, our world, our country is going to collapse and our world is over. And if this person wins, like, it's all over with. It's like, all right, everybody calm down. It's going to be okay. Like, it's not the end of the world. And, I really can't say whether or not, a case to overturn Roe would be heard from the perspective. I'm like really big on states' rights. So from that perspective, I would like to see Roe overturned, because I do believe that this is a states' rights issue. And I would like to see it go back to the states. And it doesn't hurt from my perspective that there would be states that would automatically have protections for women and their children against abortion. But, just from like a not necessarily even an abortion stance on many other issues, I prefer states' rights and kind of like that. But like what you touched on, I mean, Trump added Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and ACB, and it's like, well, everybody automatically thinks they're going to be activist judges. Kavanaugh, I don't, from where I'm looking, like, do I think that if Roe was brought to the Supreme Court and it, to be overturned, do I think that he would be an activist judge? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. ACB, I don't know, but we can't really just like rely on that. So that's the thing. Everybody's relying on Roe to be overturned, right? All these pro-life people are like, well, Roe's going to be overturned and then we're going to win. It's like, no, it's going to go back to the states and we're still going to have to fight. We're still going to have women to help. Stop talking about Roe being overturning sometime in the future and start helping women right now that are in need. Like, while there's like this war that's waging, I feel like I'm sometimes like taking cover from this war that's going on around me between the left and the right, and everybody's yelling at each other and it's just craziness. And I'm like trying to take cover and reach women where they're at. And so I do agree with you that this is kind of a distraction. I think this is a huge distraction from where we should actually be putting our effort. So who knows if it'll be overturned or not? It's really hard to say, but I don't think it's going to be like a snappy thing,
Where does moral personhood begin? Does a fetus have the same rights as a baby or a toddler? Emily, why don't we begin with you?
I mean, that's a pretty easy answer for me. I know Avens will disagree, but that's okay. I believe life begins at conception. I mean, I studied biology in college. It's really hard for me to not accept the fact that life has begun at the moment of conception. But the real question is, okay, well, when does like philosophical life begin? And I do believe it's at conception still, because that's a unique individual. Now, people ask all the time, well, when does the soul and blah, blah. I have no idea. But all I know is that there is a human being, and human beings are protected. I believe should be protected. So if you're a human being, you should be protected no matter what stage you are in your life. Whether you're a newborn baby, whether you're, 90 years old, whether you are, a prisoner up for, the death penalty. Nathan and I had just been talking about this. I'm against the death penalty. So I know this has nothing really to do with abortion. All I'm saying is that I think if you're a human being, you have rights, and you are a person, and therefore at the minute of conception, you are a unique individual, and so I do believe that you have rights, and that answers kind of the second question as well. I mean, right now, actually, my brother-in-law and his wife, they're expecting, and that's like our first baby in the family. And the other day I kind of caught myself saying, I'm going to be an aunt. And I was like, wait, I am an aunt, because that's my niece or nephew. Like, they exist. They're here, and they existed the second that they were conceived, and I was an aunt at that moment too. And I can't wait to meet them, you know. And so I would never want to say that my niece or nephew doesn't have the same rights that I do and the same protections that I do, or that other human beings in the womb don't. And so obviously that's just my clear distinction. I think it's important to have a clear distinction of when life begins, because then we get on this like weird sliding scale of, okay, well, life begins at, 5 months, or it doesn't begin until the umbilical cord is cut, and rights don't begin until it's completely separate from the mom, or, and I think it's a slippery slope to go down and say, well, we don't really know when life begins, because then that just leaves it up. It just becomes this question mark. And I think we owe it to human beings to have a solid answer on this. I don't think that, if I was looking at 2 pregnant women right now that were both 5 months pregnant, and I just, said, well, one's human, one's not, one has rights, one doesn't, it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So we have to have one place. And for me, the most logical place is that moment of conception.
That's a good point. When you draw a line in the sand about ability to reason or self-conception for babies, then you're also inviting in a question of other groups of people with limited self-awareness as well.
Yeah, it can get muddied too, because a lot of people say, well, if you don't, have self-concept, okay, well, I didn't have a self-concept of myself when I was, 8 months old. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's a slippery slope. Or maybe some people don't really have, sound reasoning when they're 90 years old. Like, that doesn't mean that they're not a person. It just means that we're in different stages of our life. I believe that life is just this continuous flow. And, I'm just as human, like, now as I was when I was conceived. Like, it's me. It's still the same person. When my parents found out they were pregnant with me, that was me. I looked a little different, and I was a little bit smaller, but that was just a stage of my life. And that's how I see it. That's just a stage of all of our lives. All of us had to go through that stage to get where we are now. So it, to me, doesn't make sense to separate that, if that makes sense. We finally disagree on something.
Right. No, here's the place. Here's where it becomes a debate, not a discussion. No. I mean, like, of course, this is what it comes down to in terms of our disagreements. I think that a lot of my perspective on, when life begins and anything like that, can be pretty well summed up by an essay on abortion by a woman named Wendy McElroy. And it really talks about the fact that, like, I can identify that, like, life, there's life happening, when a sperm meets an egg, and I can recognize that. And I definitely recognize that some people decide to invest, very early in the emotional attachment to a developing fetus, right? So some people, they get that first pregnancy test, and they're like, oh, honey, we're going to be parents. And like, people have different levels of, where they go. Like, a lot of people, don't tell their friends until they get to, 3 months along, because they're worried about a miscarriage, which is, fairly common in the first 3 months. Like, there's all these different things in which people, form this attachment of, like, this potential person's coming, and we're really excited. And as it gets closer, we get even more excited, because, like, there's less likelihood of things like miscarriage or complications or problems. But from my perspective, life isn't necessarily, to me, the standard. It's the idea of individual rights. And so when does someone get individual rights? And to me, they get them when they become an individual. And by that, when they are, like, exited from being inside another individual. Because at the end of the day, like, you've got a fetus, and it's developing, it's a baby, it's coming out, and all the while that it is living inside another person, that person has the full, like, the complete right to do what they need to do to preserve their body, to do whatever they need to do for their own body, their own protection, their own preference, their own whatever. And so for me, that individual right occurs after birth, like at birth, basically. Like once it's been removed from another being, it is now an autonomous being. And of course, like an infant, who's, a few hours old does require the care of people, but that care can now be transferred. That care can be given to, a nurse or a doctor or an aunt or an adoptive parent or the parent. It can be anyone. And so, so for me, that line ends up being that place in which it is now this individual person separate from its mother. And so that's my line. That's where, like, that's how I stand both like legally, and I understand that like other people can have other perspectives on what to them it's like, oh, this is a baby, this is my baby, this is, I've named it even though it hasn't been born yet. I recognize that people have different perspectives on that, but when it comes down to it, like where my moral position is and where my legal position is simply like that it's an individual and it gets individual rights when it is an individual, which means when it is no longer inside its mother.
Well, we're definitely on the complete opposite spectrums. But I do appreciate that you have I don't like it, but I do appreciate that you actually have a point, because a lot of people I talk to say, well, I don't really know. And I'm like, well, you better figure it out, But I guess on that point too, it does kind of muddy some waters when we think about like, okay, well, what about during birth? Like halfway in, halfway out? Like, do you know what I mean? Like they're still inside, but they're kind of halfway out. So it's like, what would you like ascribe personhood in that situation? Like, I know it's a short amount of time, but it's still a time. Like, and I know it's not like, it's just like kind of just more of like a question where it's like, okay, are they independent at that point, or are they still not dependent? Like, are you like, if the umbilical cord is still attached, that's still considered like attachment? Like, I'm totally curious.
I mean, I think yeah, this is like this like minuscule tiny whatever like detail. I mean, at the end of the day, like if you think about it from, let's say, okay, woman is like giving birth and it's literally like, the head, the baby's breech and the legs are out, but the rest of the, it's still stuck or whatever. Like
yeah.
These actual things like do occur. And
yeah.
I mean, like typically the discussion of their personhood is not like, it's usually not up to a discussion, because at that point, like a woman who's going through that process has typically gone like, I'm having this baby, like, please save the baby or whatever. Like, like that's what's typically happening in that moment. So it's not like anyone's going, well, do we need to worry about saving this? Because, typically a mother who has decided to give birth has also decided to keep that. And so, but if you look at like doctors and in the choices they have to make, and this is one of the reasons I don't like it to be legislative, and I think that doctors are typically a good standard, is like a doctor is going to look at that situation, and let's say, you've got a stuck baby, you've got a mother who's hemorrhaging or something, there's things going on, right? And in that moment, a doctor, the partner, the mother who's like currently pushing, they're trying to make decisions, save the mother, save the baby, try to save both of them, like, because those are the things that's really like when the circumstance actually happens is usually not in the process of an abortion, but in the process of somebody, of like a huge complication during a birth, right? And in those moments, doctors are trying to save everybody involved, and they're typically doing so at the behest of one of those people involved. Like the mother is typically going, save my baby, save my baby. But if the mother were to say, save me, we can always have another baby, like that would be, to me, that would be a valid perspective. If it's halfway out and the doctor's trying to make a call about who to save, like, actually what's funny is my partner and I have talked about this. And I literally, like, we have like a, when couples come up with like their power of attorney sort of things, like what should my partner advocate on my behalf if I were, in a vegetative state or like unable to make my own decisions. And one of the stipulations is, if it's me versus fetus, if you can save only one of us, save me. And that's something that like he and I both strongly like stand like for, like that's something we strongly believe in. But lots of other people have different perspectives. A lot of people go like, no, save my child. And I don't know if, I could be 8 months pregnant and I could be like, honey, let's change the form. I want it to be the other way around. But but people, I like that people get to make that distinction. But I think that, it's this place, like, it's still in, if it's still inside somebody else, then my concern is that person carrying it, that host, that woman, like, that person gets to make the call in terms of, are we, is this going to come out via C-section? Are we going to have to pull her out? Like, if I keep having a natural birth, will it mean that there's, not enough air given to the fetus and it ends up brain dead? Like, all of those things end up still being a question of bodily autonomy for that woman, because she's the one enduring that, like, that birth experience, right? But once it is outside of her body, then it's very clear that, like, the doctors don't have to choose at that point. The doctors don't have to go like, oh, I'm sorry, like, we're like busy with the fetus. No, like, other doctors can take care of a mother and a baby. So to me, it's like, it's still halfway inside. I'm going with mom, because, like, at the end of the day, like, that's that person's body that's like currently issuing the new life, but it is also just such a tiny itty bitty, like, perspective, like, sliver of space, both in time and in terms of, like, it being something that anyone would ever put up to discussion. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, yeah.
Sure. It's more like a philosophical thing too, because I mean, it's hard for me to allow, like, the location of a human being to be like, well, okay, you're not human right now, but in a second you will be, or you'll be an individual. It's just like, I just can't see that. But I mean, I definitely respect your opinion, but like I said, I don't think location is enough of a valid, like, thing to determine an individual. I mean, we could debate on this for hours, but I do like, I try to see where people are coming from, and I do try to see where you're coming from. It's hard for me, but I'm trying.
I understand. I know. I respect that. If you could go talk to some, like, Republicans about whether or not rights are determined by location for, like, people who are south of a particular border, that'd be great.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, that's another thing as well, right? Like, I mean,
location,
this applies
right.
to so many other issues, And I think we may agree on a lot more issues too. Like, I mean, I won't get into it, but definitely I think we'd have a lot of other things that we'd agree on too.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah.
COVID-19 has affected this year like no other. How has that affected pregnant women who want to keep their baby, and how has it affected women seeking abortions? Emily, why don't you begin with what you've seen from Let Them Live?
For sure. Wow, COVID-19. The first couple of things that come to mind are job loss and domestic violence. We have seen so many people lose their jobs. I mean, a lot of women that we work with are, like, waitresses, for example. The other thing is that when you maybe lose your job, or you can't go where you need to go because of restrictions, you're at home. And when you're at home, you may not necessarily have an escape from your home life, which may be abusive. So we've definitely seen a lot of that, which I think has increased the women that are coming to us that otherwise may not have, because they, job loss, they can't afford to pay for things. So then if they find themselves pregnant, kind of their initial thing is to say, well, I can't take care of another life, so I have to end this pregnancy. So that's definitely been an immediate effect. The other thing, like I had mentioned, is domestic violence. That's really sad. We've seen a lot of that at Let Them Live, and I know it's because of COVID, and it breaks my heart because it's just horrifying. And these poor women are stuck in these situations and, are being abused. And that plays into the abortion decision as well, just hugely. And that's been really increased by COVID. So I mean, if you can think of other reasons too, Avens, those are just the main two that have caused an uptick in women seeking abortions.
I've also noticed on the pro-choice front, we're dealing with the fact that a lot of restrictions, particularly early in COVID, a lot of the restrictions that we were seeing regarding just like in-person like lockdowns in terms of like in-person care. So, when medical facilities are being closed unless they're treating COVID, and things that are generally considered elective are being like shunted aside. Like, hey, this is elective. We can wait. We need the beds for COVID patients, et cetera. But what we've also seen is just like restrictions on people being able to, let's say, go to a doctor's office and get access to abortion. And so we saw that there was a whole thing about like women in Texas not being able to access abortions particularly early. And that was an interesting one because, for example, for abortions that happen before 8 or 9 weeks, it is actually possible to take a series of pills to have an abortion. And literally, like, what it's doing to your body is it's basically like the first pill causes your body's hormones to just kind of reduce. So like the pregnancy hormones that are sustaining that embryo basically reduce. And then the next pills basically cause contractions until you lose it. Like, it's basically like a miscarriage. It's like a medically induced miscarriage. And I'm familiar with this procedure because I've had one, and I had one at 6 weeks along. So I'm very familiar with this procedure, and it literally, like, at the time that I got mine, it literally, like, I went into the doctor's office, I talked to the doctor about everything, they determined, how far along my pregnancy was, and then, they gave me some pills, and I still had to do the in-person consult, but then they gave me some pills, and I brought them home to take, and so the entire thing was done in the privacy of my own home, et cetera, and so all of that's good. But in a lot of states, there's all these extra requirements in order to get those pills. You need to like have this visit and then like a follow-up visit before you can actually get those pills. And then you have to have a follow-up visit afterwards. And a lot of the restrictions for COVID with lockdowns were actually making it so that women couldn't get those doctor's appointments to even get those pills which we take at home and the doctor doesn't have to be present for. And what's interesting is in other countries, those pills are available not just over the counter, but they're actually available like via mail. So in like India, you can actually just order these pills and you can actually get them just sent to your home and you can take them. And so there's actually a couple of organizations in the U.S. that basically order pills from India for women who can't get them in their home state in the U.S. And we saw like a major uptick of women in Texas and other states who like their abortion clinics were closed. They couldn't get an abortion. They wanted one at like 6 weeks, 7 weeks. They had an accidental pregnancy. Everyone's home in lockdown, due to COVID. They're having a little more sex. And then like, oh crap. And so they contact this website. I'm trying to remember. I think it's like Aid Access or something. But it's this international organization that basically gets pills from India and then sends them to American women so that they can have this thing that would happen at home anyway. Like the whole process happens at home. The only thing you need is like to get them from the doctor. And so COVID definitely saw an uptick in that of women having to wait. So then having abortions when they're further along, or women having to go around to find abortion access another way, which sometimes involves, consulting with an international organization that will send you pills from a country that's less precious about them. And so that's definitely something we've seen in COVID. And I know I helped women, like, because I'm in California and there was no like restriction, no problem continuing that, to get abortion pills. And so like a friend of mine got them for somebody who was in a state where there were restrictions. And so it's unfortunate, but like COVID definitely has had an effect on as like the things that Emily's talking about in terms of people not feeling like they can financially handle having a baby, and domestic abuse, feeling like people aren't sure if they can do the baby thing anyway, but then also their access to abortion has been diminished as well.
Yeah, no, and I did want to just, this has nothing to do with COVID, but one thing about the abortion pills, if it's kind of simulating a miscarriage, typically when women miscarry, they will go, see a doctor and have like appointments after to make sure everything's good. So I don't think it's like super out of reach to have that happen, like have a doctor say, hey, you need to come back and see me, because it could react differently depending on who the woman is. And I just think it's important you know, that there is a follow-up with a medical professional because of just the nature of it. I mean, I don't know. That I just wanted to touch on that, but I do agree that COVID has changed a lot this year, and it's been a heck of a year, that's for sure. But I think also that COVID in a positive light has shown people just how much we have to step up for others. I mean, outside of the scope of abortion as well, just in general, I think we're realizing that we're all in this together. We're this community of humans that need to look out for each other, that need to take care of each other when things go wrong, like they have this year. And it seems like everything has gone wrong this year. So
does feel like it.
Yeah.
This question is supplemental to the COVID question. If women are unable to receive abortions, what happens? Emily?
For sure. Well, you know, when you had mentioned like coat hanger abortions, this kind of goes back to when I talked about how you can legislate all you want, but if we're not making a cultural shift, nothing will really change. And so it's hard for me to really answer this question because, you know, from my perspective and from the research that I've done, if women aren't able to receive abortions, the result is, you know, I mean, I can't tell you how many women I've talked about and how many statistics I've read about, you know, psychological and emotional and physical effects of, you know, consequences of having abortions. But, you know, what I said before still stands, that this is a cultural issue that I believe we have to solve differently than legislatively. So you can make abortion illegal and, you know, everybody can bring up, well, women are going to have coat hanger abortions and women are going to have abortions this other way, maybe go get, you know, pills from another country. I mean, I know that happens. I know that women, I saw a documentary of a woman in Southern California who went to Mexico, just crossed the border and got her pills and went back home. You know, so regardless of legality, you know, I understand that this will happen. And that's why I do believe that this has to be addressed from a cultural standpoint. And I think that kind of feeds into that question. But I know that on the flip side, every time I say, well, you know, these are the consequences of abortion, somebody's always going to say, well, these are the consequences of not having an abortion, you know, and it's also psychological or emotional. And so, you know, there's tons of anecdotes both ways, but no matter, you know, if I say like, hey, I know somebody, you know, Avens could say, well, I know somebody, you know, and it's on the opposite side. So ultimately, this is a cultural situation that we have to address because regardless of legal or illegal, this may or may not happen. So that's kind of a general answer, but, you know.
I think so. Yeah, no, I agree with you. We talking about coat hanger abortions. It's interesting because we can look at the stats of countries where abortion is illegal. There's a number of countries that are extremely Catholic or have other just religious or just, you know, their legal stipulations on abortions cause a lot of women to seek illegal abortions. And so right now, I believe 30,000 women die every year from botched abortions in countries where it is illegal. And so typically, like, I don't see illegality as necessarily like a defense of life if women will go out and get something that, you know, is even less regulated and less safe because, you know, it's a back alley abortion or, you know, or anything like that. So, you know, the consequences of women not being able to access abortion. I mean, there's the consequences of, you know, of, let's say, illegality where people seek out illegal abortions. And we can see those kinds of numbers, 30,000 women a year dying all over the world in countries where they are illegal. You can also see that in countries where abortion is unattainable, there tend to be a lot of additional, like there are laws and consequences for those women beyond just beyond the accessing those illegal abortions. But also like women who miscarry will often, in some countries like El Salvador, Nicaragua, or Brazil, will find that they are like a family member will say, oh, she had a miscarriage, but I think she had an abortion, and then they're facing literally prison time, or the doctors that they think helped them will be facing prison time. I have this like laundry list of these instances in other countries where women have sought illegal abortions and haven't died from them. Everything was fine there, but then they they end up with all of these legal consequences as a result. But that's one side of it. It's like if if they go seeking an illegal abortion, they could have death, or they could have like huge like penalties or prison time or anything else. And then there's the side of just if women can't access abortion and then opt to carry a pregnancy that they didn't want, there are the consequences of that. There's the consequences of pregnancy, and I know like Emily kind of alluded to that, like we could go back and forth, the consequences of pregnancy can include things like, gestational diabetes or preeclampsia or just, like irreparable damage to one's body or, uterine prolapse or, anything like hemorrhaging up to death. I mean, the fact is, childbirth is the 6th leading cause of death to women between the ages of 20 and 35 in this country, which is a pretty crazy stat. Now, I mean, it's behind things like suicide. Like, thankfully, like childbirth is not like, I mean, it's the 6th leading cause of death, but thankfully a lot of women don't die between 20 and 35 anyway. But there are consequences to carrying a pregnancy. There are consequences to having children, and there are entire forums on like Reddit and other websites talking about parental regret. And it's such a stigmatized thing as well, because people aren't supposed to say that they wish they hadn't had their kids. And so it's like this long going thing. And I mean, I know Emily can pop in about, the potential like physical or psychological consequences of having an abortion. Like these things are real consequences. And it's one of the reasons that I'm so strongly opposed to anyone else making that decision for someone, because there can be consequences no matter what you do. And so we want to make sure that none of those consequences are like externally caused, and like that women are able to do what they think is best for them and deal with whatever natural consequences occur of the act itself.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's always consequences in life. I mean, for every single thing that we do. So it's a matter of,
exactly.
And in my opinion, I think, I do, because I think that the fetus is an individual. I do think that, the decisions we make shouldn't necessarily be affecting other people, especially with abortion, because like you said, like, birth and pregnancy causing irreparable damage to one's own body. Like I could say the same thing to, abortion. Like that's pretty much the most irreparable damage that you could cause a human being is aborting them. But, and the other thing too is that, a lot of women, even women that wanted their children, like one of our pregnancy counselors, she loves her kids to death, but she definitely suffered like postpartum depression and anxiety. So there were days where she felt like, oh my gosh, like I don't, maybe I don't love my kids, but I mean, that's something that anybody can experience, and not necessarily just women that, maybe wanted an abortion but couldn't get one. That's sometimes a natural way of the body, the body and your hormones, or there's a lot that goes on after birth.
For sure.
But what I do want to touch on that I'm glad that you brought up was prison time, because this is something I'm really glad you brought this up, because this is something that a lot of pro-life people have disagreements on. And I'm sure that you can, where I stand on this issue. I'm totally against that. I don't think women should be put in prison for that. And I think that that's something that, that's another point of like common ground that people like us can have to make sure that things like that don't happen, because there's a whole movement of pro-life people that, I mean, literally we just got this comment on our Facebook page from an allegedly pro-life person, and she said, it was on one of our fundraisers for our moms, and she said, "Save the baby, jail the whore." And I lost it. Like, I was so mad. Like, that's one of just like, I can't even begin to describe how mad that made me, because that's not a solution to anything, like just stop saying stuff like that, because that's not cool.
It's the exact opposite of helping.
exact opposite of helping. So, and it's crazy from people that, claim to be pro-life, but really they are just kind of like pro-fetus, basically. They don't care about the woman. They just want to throw her in jail. And that's not at all the approach that we should be taking. And I don't think that that's ever a place that women should be. Like I said, that's a huge contentious debate that us pro-lifers have, but I'm definitely not for that. So I'm glad that you brought that up, because that is something very important.
There's so much stigma around having a miscarriage as well. People will say, oh, she's just saying that because she doesn't want to tell you that she had an abortion, among a number of other really hurtful comments, with zero regard to like how much pain that person is going through. There's so little empathy for the women involved.
Well, the word itself too implies that the woman did something wrong, which when you naturally miscarry, that, see, I even just said it, when you naturally miscarry, you didn't like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think in our terms that we use, like, it does cause stigma, like a miscarriage, like you did something wrong when carrying, so we have to figure out other terms, I guess, too.
Right. Well, yeah, people don't realize how common miscarriages are. And and what's funny is actually everyone just socially calls it a miscarriage, but in the like actual like medical terminology for it, like, a doctor's office will be like, oh yeah, she had a miscarriage, whatever. But if they're like referring to it from like a surgical, whatever, like if they're, like if they're having a doctor to doctor conversation, the terminology that's used medically is actually a spontaneous abortion. Like, so it's, it's funny because it's like, hi, this was a spontaneous abortion. That doesn't mean I just went, oh my God, I'm pregnant and like, I'm just drunk, so I'm going to go and get a spontaneous abortion. No, like it literally, like, it's just your body having a spontaneous abortion. The body.
Our culture takes terms and like, and the way we like view terms is it kind of gets associated with certain things, like abortion being the deliberate termination. But yeah, you're right. Like spontaneous abortion is like a natural miscarriage. But like, yeah, of course it, the way our society like takes terms is, how we associate it with things.
Yeah.
If that made any sense. I think I just like garbled my words out, but.
Yeah, for sure. And that's the thing is like like when, it's like when we start looking at like what the world would look like if abortion is illegal, like I'm glad that there are pro-lifers who are going like, oh, I don't want to imprison women, because, that could theoretically be something that comes up, because, like I have all these stats, and a lot of them are like South American countries particularly, or like tend to be very Catholic or very religious, and they tend to have like very strong abortion like legislation, and it's crazy stuff, like like a young girl has a miscarriage, and because she had expressed upset because she had been raped or something, like somebody's like, oh, like it must have been an abortion, because she was raped, so of course she would have had an abortion, and so now prison time, and then the doctor gets prison time, and then and the doctor, there's no proof that the doctor did it, it's like this whole like crazy thing. I have this like laundry list of these things, and it's so scary. And I like to think that would never happen here, but it's also like, it is crazy to know that it's happening for some women in those places. And that's just like, it's really sad,
Yeah, I agree.
I wanted to move into final remarks and sort of public consensus. Where do we go from here after the pandemic, all of the discussion on SCOTUS and laws? I mean, what does the future look like?
So, ultimately, as it stands, I'm a pro-choice activist. I work with several organizations trying to support pro-choice activism, and I've also helped raise money for women to get abortions. I like my strongest value is people being able to make voluntary choices, and if those choices are to have babies or to not have babies, then that's great. I'd like to see the number of abortions go down, not because I have any issue with abortion, but because I'd like to see the number of unwanted pregnancies go down. I'd like to see that like people are able to utilize birth control and utilize like environmental things to not have these unwanted pregnancies in the first place. My goal, and I bet you that this is the same goal as Emily's, is like I want every parent to be willing and every child to be wanted. Like, that's what I want in the world, is I want every parent to be willing and every child to be wanted. And we have different ways of going about that, right? I obviously don't want government interference, and Emily doesn't want much government. Like, Emily's close on there in terms of, like, we don't want government to get in the way of people, like, making decisions. We want people to make decisions, and we want them to make different decisions. I personally, like, I have no issue if a person thinks that this is the right decision for them to have an abortion. I want to be there and support them and answer any questions they have about it, or even possibly help pay for it. But if somebody doesn't want to have an abortion and wants to give birth, wants to have a child, wants to raise a child, or give it up for adoption, whatever they want, I want them to have that choice too. And so I think that there's a lot of common ground and a lot of places where we can find, like, ways to work together to try to make a world where, like, people have options and people have choices and people can make whatever choice is best for them. And, I'm somebody who will be advocating abortion as a perfectly valid choice, sometimes the best choice. And I know that's where Emily and I would definitely disagree, but, I'm there to provide that as much as I can. And what I hope coming out of this is, I'd like to see a world where people stop trying to force people to do things their way legislatively. And that includes, I don't want the pro-choice movement forcing people to use taxpayer dollars to fund abortions. I don't think that that's good. I don't think that the pro-life movement should have, taxpayers funding, pregnancy crisis centers or whatever. What I want is, like, for government to get out and for people to make the best decisions they can for themselves, whether they're the right decisions or the wrong decisions, whether they're abortion or life. It's not about that for me. It's about making sure that people have autonomy and control over the choices that they're making. So, I'm always going to look to my allies in all respects, my libertarian allies, my conservative allies who realize that legislation isn't the way to go, my liberal allies who I will fight with about whether or not government should fund things. I'm always going to try to find the places of agreement, and I'm going to try to fight for the most voluntary world possible so that we have less need of abortion, so that we have more resources at people's disposal for education, prevention, and also for them to be able to make the choices that they want to make. And if that's having babies, then it's having babies. And, like, that's what I'm fighting for, is I'm fighting for, like, less necessity of it, but at the end of the day, I'm fine with it. And I think that we should, that people should make whatever choice they need to, and I will go there and hold their hand, and I'll go there, hold their hand at whatever choice they make. And if they want to have a baby, I'll go send them Emily's way. And if they don't want to have a baby, I will hold their hand and walk them through the process of an abortion, because that's just, like, that's who I am, that's where I am. And I never want people to make decisions that they might regret, but you never know what thing someone's going to regret, and you never know, like, the end result all the way down the line. So all you can do is take the information that you have and try to support people so they can make decisions that they can own and that they can be responsible for, whatever they happen to be.
Well, I'm really glad that we, had this conversation today, because it always gives me new perspectives and a fresh take on things, because I always want to do the very best I can in representing women that are in crisis and that need support and just need some love. And so I definitely appreciate, you giving me your opinions too, because it does give me, a better idea of what people believe and what's what's going on in the world. I just want to say that I did appreciate your time as well. And I think this is great, because I think we can find common ground. And I think that a lot of the times when we disagree with somebody on something, our immediate reaction is just to go at their throat. But we have to really take a step back and say, well, is that productive? Is that really going to make a change? And ultimately, most people want to make a change. Like, I know you want to make a change. I want to make a change. If we didn't want to make changes, we wouldn't be in this line of work. We'd be working at, like, McDonald's or something. But we obviously want to make a change. So the best way that we can go about this is finding, okay, well, how can we make a change together for the betterment of society? And I absolutely love that Let Them Live has kind of, like, hit this weird new space of finding common ground between pro-lifers and pro-choicers, because for so many years this has been just a contentious issue that I don't think we've found real common ground on. But I think that we've finally struck gold, and I'm very, very excited about that, because I think the future is very, very bright for people that, like you and I, that can come together, that can agree. We can disagree, but we can also agree on some practical solutions. And I just think it's amazing. And I think that this is the future. I think that the future is looking really awesome. I think that, like, for example, Let Them Live is growing so much, which is amazing. And I think the future for Let Them Live and women that we work with is very amazing. I can't wait to keep holding all these babies that come and getting to know their families and getting to know these women. And they're just incredible women that we support. And I'm very, very lucky to be able to know them. And so, moving forward, I think the movements in general, we just need to find very productive, realistic ways to support women instead of adoption and here's some diapers and, just all this noise. We need to blanket out and find just practical ways to help women in need. And so, again, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing me to share that with you too, and being able to share my opinion too with you and hear yours. It means a lot, especially with all this noise going on around us. So, just wanted to say thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Knowledge Problem Podcast. If you liked the episode, please subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. Also, consider following our social media accounts to stay up to date on new developments in the show and to share your opinions. We'd like to give one final thank you to our guests today for taking the time to engage in productive conversation. We would like to also thank our sponsors, Young Voices.